There we go. Didn't want to forget that. So we're doing a review of the slash and spread, a review of the pivot before we move into starting to create our first bodice, because we're going to take our patterns that we have drafted and transfer them and make little mini hat bodices. Okay, and let's go ahead and bring this into the neckline. So for the slash and spread method, I start by tracing my block or sloper. I transfer my apex, not my vanishing point, and draw my original dart to my apex. I am then going to cut out my tracing. I'm going to cut out my dart up to and not through that apex. And finally, I'm going to slash, cut up to and not through. And spread it open. So I have a nice large dart in my neckline. I'm going to close this shut. Just like that. So I've transferred my dart from my waist to my neckline, right in the center of my neckline. I'm going to, for easiness sake, just tape this to a piece of printer paper and add my seam allowance and find my dart intake. I like tape. I like using it apparently. Okay. So on my center front seam, how much seam allowance am I going to add?
1/2 inch.
Yep. Absolutely. My waistline, how much seam allowance am I going to add?
1/2 inch.
Yep. What about the side seam?
1/2 inch.
Armhole?
1/2 inch.
Yep. Okay, then how about shoulder?
1/2 inch.
Finally, neckline.
1/4 inch.
There we go. You know it. Do, do, do. Okay. So I'm going to make my vanishing point. It's going to be a 1/4 inch from my apex. Tradition in a full scale, it's a 1/2 inch. And then from there, I can draw my dart legs. Drawing my dart legs. And then I'm going to find my drill hole, which we're going to do a 1/2 inch from the apex. And traditionally, or in full scale, it is still 1/2 inch. I would circle it in red if I had a red pen, but I do not. So I'm going to go ahead and circle it in white. I'm going to find my dart intake in my neck. I'm going to score, which means to drag my awl along my dart legs, not my slashed open, but my dart legs. I'm going to drag it along just to put a little crease in the paper. Drag it along, put a little crease in the paper. And then finally, probably don't want to put all this dart right into the center front. So I'm going to take the dart and point it towards my shoulder, the intake. I'm going to lay this dart leg, my dart legs right on top of each other, matching them up right at this neckline so that my neckline closes perfectly. If I need to, I can use a little piece of tape to secure it. Essentially, I have closed my dart in my paper, like so. Looks like my neckline's a little off, so I want, oh wait, it's right on my dart leg, so it should be fine. Go ahead and add my 1/4 inch seam allowance to my front. Probably should have drew this in mostly before I closed it up because now I'm fighting a little bump. And I'm going to find my dart intake by simply clipping my piece closed. I have a crazy dart intake. I don't need it to be that high, so I'm going to blunt that. I'm going to also, because I don't want to have too much fabric in by my neckline, I'm going to give some seam allowance to the inside and cut that out, and that will also help blunt this. So just cut across extra stuff I don't need. Beautiful. And then what I want is my seam, I want the seam allowance when I fold my dart to lay nicely right in my seam line of my neck. And it looks like that will do it. If I think it's a little too much, I can trim it down a little, but it still needs to get caught up in that seam allowance line. So I could take it down. I live on a busy street. I apologize for the obnoxious car. Just like that. And so you can see on this side, it will still sew in on the seam allowance line. So that is our slash and spread. So finding the intake, again, you're going to fold it right along the dart legs, lining up the dart legs and matching it right at the edge of the seam line. And that is going to be our dart transfer via slash and spread. We can cut this out. This will be our pattern piece. And then do the same with the pivot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start my tracing. Draw a line on it. Right where I want my dart to open. So say I want it to open right here on the neckline. I'm going to start tracing right there. Go ahead, trace, 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 get to the first dart leg that's open. I don't want to put a hole in my table. So I have a little cutting mat I slid underneath it. I'm gonna go ahead and grab the vanishing point or the apex, rotate to close my dart. Continue tracing all the way around until I get to that first spot that I was at. Make sure that I have my apex marked. Go ahead and draw in my apex line, but that doesn't matter because it's from my vanishing point, which is a 1/4 inch in. So my dart legs will live right here. And right there. Great. Let's find my drill hole. Perfect. And now I can go ahead and add my seam allowance and find the same dart intake. And you see with both methods, you can get the same singular dart transfer. No, I went very quickly, but we went over it last week. So are there any questions from this? Does it seem pretty clear? Awesome. I asked the question as I was looking down at the patterns, and then I was like, oh, you might have your mics mute. So turned over, looked at you guys. Okay, saw some head nods. Perfect. So that is the quick review for our dart transfer. Today, we're going to build on this because we're going to see how our little half scale patterns sew together. And how we're going to do that is we're going to cut our pattern pieces out onto muslin, and we're going to sew our dart and we're going to sew our pattern pieces together for our piece. So if this is going to be our pattern for today's exercise, we have all this beautiful seam allowance already on here. Go ahead and transfer my dart, transfer my notch, notch, notch. Great. So I have my front piece, but if I'm going to make a bodice, what do I need to sew my front piece to? If you have a front of a shirt, what does the front of the shirt have to be attached to?
Back.
Back of the shirt, yep. So we're gonna also grab our back pieces for today's exercise. So my question for you is, can I just trace this and go? And this is a pattern piece and this is a pattern piece? So this one we know is a pattern piece because we have our seam allowance on here. We don't have a label on here. Let's go and call this week 3 bodice. I'm going to call this the front. I'm going to say half size 8. I put my name because I'm the pattern drafter, and I'm going to say cut to self. So I have a pattern piece here. And what do I have here? So this piece has seam allowance. It has a label. It has notches. It has a drill hole. So this piece is a pattern piece. This piece is a sloper or a block. So this piece does not have seam allowance. So it cannot sew to this, because if we were to line this side up to this side to sew it, you could see that this won't sew together. There's nothing to sew to our front piece to put our shoulders and our side seams together. So what we have to do first, if we're going to, for the sake of this exercise, we're going to leave this as the same pattern. What we'll do is we will trace it and add seam allowance. We're going to transfer our notches. We're going to transfer our drill holes. Lining up my grain line. Little notch. Trace the whole thing, transfer my tops of my darts. Go ahead and draw my darts in. Go ahead and draw in my little dart. What I'm going to add to this before my seam allowance, I'm going to add my drill hole. So I'm going to go a 1/2 inch down on this waist dart, make a little mark, circle it. Here, I'm going to go a 1/2 inch down from the point, and my dart, put a dot, and circle it. And then finally, I'm going to add seam allowance, starting at the waistline. So I'm going to take my ruler, trace my seam allowance. Around my armhole. I'm not going to add seam allowance to my back piece. I'll tell you why in just a minute. My center back piece, I mean, excuse me, my center back line. Okay. So like I said earlier, I'm not going to add any seam allowance to my back line because I'm going to make this center back one piece cut on fold. So how I'm going to do that, I'm going to denote it by going from my grain line and adding some arrows pointing to the center back line of my back piece. This symbol here is the symbol for cut on fold. And I'm not going to rely on my pattern maker or my seamster to know that. I'm going to also say, call this the week 3 bodice. This is going to be the back piece. This is half size 8. And then I'll put my name on it because just in case you need to know who made it. And then finally, I'm going to say cut 1 self on fold. That way I have it cut 1 on fold and it's telling us it's self. So that I have my piece like that. Why don't you take the time to go ahead and find whichever of your, either your pivot or your slash and spread dart rotation, bodice front pieces. Why don't you go ahead and take those, whichever one you want to do for today. And then go ahead and add seam allowance to your bodice back piece. I am going to finish pressing my fabric. Let me know when everybody has their front piece selected and their back piece. I'm looking for my mount. I'm not sure where it went. I had it last class, so it's around here somewhere. Give me 1 second. I luckily have a second one. Ha, ha, ha. Swear there's little gremlins in my house because I just lost my little mini cutting mat too. Ah.
Okay, I think I'm done.
Okay, perfect. How about you, Dion?
Yeah, I'm done too.
Okay, great. So we have our very first bodice patterns that we have made. Huzzah! Very little, nothing really done to the back, but we have made some adjustments to our front. So I'm gonna do, since I have cut to self, I've got 2 layers of muslin laid right on top of each other. I've got my grain line in this direction of my fabric. I'm gonna go ahead and lay my piece right on the fabric and pin it. I like to pin my pattern pieces so that they are 45 degrees from the corner or perpendicular to the cut line. For muslin and patterns like this, it's not going to really make a big difference. But when you get to trickier fabric, you'll find that having your pins perpendicular to the fold line or the cut line, you will have less distortion in your cuts. I put a bunch of clips and pins in for this one. I just got pin happy for this. So I have my front piece pinned. I have my back piece. Here's my grain line. I'm going to go ahead and put that on the fold. So I folded the fabric in half. I have my fold line here and my grain line here. I'm going to line up this edge very carefully so it's right on the edge of the fold. If I have too much fold or too little fold, and it's not just right, then I'm going to be changing the size of my piece. I'm focusing on pinning this fold line first. And I'm going to move around the pattern. Adding my pins. I am going to now cut my pieces out. So for this piece, I'm just going to cut around all the edges except for the fold edge, clearly, because I want to keep this as a one piece versus 2 bodice back pieces. I'm keeping my bottom blade on the table, trying to keep my wrist as straight as possible. And I'm moving the fabric and not my blade to cut. Practices like this will help improve how straight you cut, as well as help protect your wrist from developing or worsening carpal tunnel. My back piece, I'll go ahead and place it to the side. And I'm going to cut my 2 fronts. Okay, before I take my pins out, I'm going to clip my notches. So I have a notch at each dart leg. I have a notch in the armhole for my front. And then finally, I'm going to punch my drill hole. So right in the center of my drill hole, I'm going to use my awl and punch right through. did not draw out my notches on my back piece, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Bad, Christine. Always want your notches. Again, our notches are in the armhole and at each dart leg. So I'm going to clip our notches first. And then I'm going to punch 2 drill holes for my back piece. Go ahead and do that. Go ahead and take my pattern piece off of my fabric. Set that to the side.
I'm just going to step away for a moment where it's a little easier to cut.
Of course, of course. Once you get cut, we'll continue. I'm just getting my second camera set up. Working with 4 cameras today. Oh, cool. Just waiting for Riley to come back before I do the next step, which is going to be identifying our vanishing point of our darts, right? So if we have our drill hole 1/2 inch from our vanishing point, why don't you get started doing this? Just gonna go up 1/2 inch. I'm gonna use a marker. I would suggest you just go ahead and use a pencil or chalk. I'm using a marker so it's very visible. And then I'm going to draw my line 1/2 inch from my seam allowance, lining up right with my notch. I only need to draw one for each dart because I only need to see one side when I sew. If you'd like to draw both, go right ahead. Okay, Riley. So what I have shown Dion is the next thing we're going to do before we start sewing is we're going to mark. Oh, I don't know if she can hear because she doesn't have her headset in. Welcome back. So the next thing we're going to do before we start sewing is we're going to mark our vanishing point for each of our darts. And we're going to draw a line from our vanishing point to where our notch is at our dart leg. So we only need to draw one on each side because we're going to line it up right along the notches right here. We're going to pin it along the notches and sew straight down. So we only need one side because we have a point here and we have a point here. So how I'm going to do that, because our drill hole is a 1/2 inch from the vanishing point, so I'm going to center my ruler between my two notches, draw a dart or draw a point, and then draw that point to my dart leg. And I'm going to do that for each of my The reason we do a drill hole a 1/2 inch from our vanishing point is so that we don't damage the fabric where it could be seen. Because if we were to sew right up on this drill hole, we might not be able to see the damage itself. Or we might be able, like it might end right on the damage, and you don't want the point of your dart to be visible and as damaged. once I have my darts marked, I'm gonna go ahead and start by sewing the darts in each of my piece. So I have 2 fronts and each of them have a single dart. I have 1 back and it has 4 darts. So I'll start with my front. I'm gonna lay it together, matching up my notches that I have put in, matching up, pressing flat right on the vanishing point of the dart. And then I am going to finger press. If I'd like to hit it with an iron, you're more than welcome, but due to time constraints tonight, I'm just going to finger press. So I'm gonna lay my dart like that. I'm gonna pin all of mine and then I'm changing cameras and I will be sewing these darts. Okay. This is going to be fun. Okay. So lots and lots of angles are happening. So I have the smaller camera here where you can see me hold the piece up so you can enlarge your window. And then I have the vertical video, which is going to be my self-stitching. So as you yourself should be able to adjust your cameras accordingly. So I have my first front piece. I'm going to go ahead and I took my knee raise out. And it won't let me take it out. There we go. Now my needle lined up with my line. My threads through. I'm going to drop it, the presser foot, right on piece, line up my needle, drop my needle, stitch forward, back stitch, and then go ahead and stitch my darts. When I get to the end, if I'm very good, but I have to be very good. Oh, did it time out? There we go. Sorry. If I get to the end and I'm very confident in my ability to stay on the line that I just stitched, I can go ahead and back stitch, but only if I know I'm going to back stitch over exactly where I just stitched. Oops, you can't see that, like that. That's going to tie a little knot in the end of my dart. Or what I can do is start the same way, start at the notches, drop my needle, back stitch, sew all the way down to the end. Take out my pin and just simply sew all the way off. Give myself nice long threads. Instead of using a back stitch, I'm going to tie a little square knot here, right at the edge of my dart. So it's very hard in this teeny tiny little space. 1 and 2. Great. That finishes off my dart and trim the ends. So you have either choice. It really depends on how confident you are in lining up your stitch line. I'm going to continue sewing the rest of the darts. So I've got 4 darts to sew in my back piece. I'm going to continue to back stitch my dart legs, force a habit. These are very tiny darts. Very, very narrow, tiny, tiny darts. Now I'm going to trim all my little threads while you sew your darts. And then once I have it all trimmed up, I'm going to be pressing my darts and lining up and sewing my shoulders and my side seams to create my first mini garment, my first pattern garment. So if I say, stop share. And once your darts are sewn, we'll just go ahead and sew together shoulder seams and side seams. So we have our back piece here with all of our darts. We have our two front piece. The side without the stitching, without the dart intake, that's our right sides. So we're going to put right sides together, lining up our side seam and our shoulder seam. I'm going to fold my dart intake at the neck towards the shoulder, and in the back, I'm going to fold it in towards the neck. Pin my shoulder like this, and then I'm going to pin my side seam. Have these pinned, I can then go ahead and sew them. I have my seam allowance set to 1/2 inch with on my guideline. I'm going to sew my side seam first, back stitch, stitch at the end, and then the shoulder, same thing, 1/2 inch seam allowance, line up the 1/2 inch, drop the needle, back stitch, so I have one side done with my front on my back, and do the other side again, right sides together, lining up my shoulder seams and my side seams. Your side and shoulder seams should still be the same. They should be the same length. No problem to just kind of line them up and sew them. And like that, you have your first little mini half-size bodice with our fronts and our back. So I want you to go ahead, once you have it dart sewn, I want you to sew it together at the shoulders and at the side seam. Did you finish your bodice, Dion? Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you.
I just pinned it. Because I'm not going to sew it now. I want to sew it later. So
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, let's give Riley just a minute more to finish sewing hers so that it's like your first garment. We will be moving into just review on adjusting patterns and talking about our first project. So did you pick your first project, Dion, for this class?
not yet.
Not yet? Okay, so then that's what my camera froze, it looks like. What I would love for you to do is to go ahead and start finding a pattern to work from
Oh,
for your first pattern for this class.
okay.
My video is having some issues. I'll be right back. I'm still here, actually. I haven't left. Oh, I just had to unplug it. It didn't like that camera anymore.
Actually, I just picked a pattern. Okay.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
I bought it for so long.
Excuse me.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. What do you think of your first little bodice?
I'm still unfolding it. It's it reminds me of doll clothes.
Yeah. A little half scale.
Mhm.
So essentially with this, you've sewn your first, well, maybe not your first garment, but your first garment, it's the basic, doesn't have the seam finishes, but I want you to keep this because we'll be adding sleeves to it later. We'll be adding facing and a collar to it later, maybe even a skirt to make it a dress. So we'll be building off of this little baby piece. We'll be sewing other ones too when we get to princess seams. So we're going to play with that as well. But yeah, so this is our first little bodice. It's so
Aw,
cute.
It is cute.
I wish I had like a doll still that I could put it on. I'd put it on my cat. I don't know if you can see her snuggled on the pillow behind me,
Aw, yeah.
but she'd probably kill me. So
You've given me an idea. I think I'll try that with my cat.
oh.
I mean, I put Christmas sweaters on him, so like,
Oh, okay. So
I feel
that's
like
intolerant. She hears me talking about her. She's like, I don't think so. Yeah, my cat is 16 and she's a grumpy old lady.
aw, mine's only 5, so
Oh yeah,
He's,
bunch more
um,
tolerant.
yeah, he's a bit more compliant, but we've put him through a lot, so I feel like he I don't know, he's kind of used to us now.
Aw, good. They should be. They're our familiars. So we are going to talk now for the last bit of class, and we're going to start applying these measurement changes to our patterns that we have chosen for this first project for here. Remember, the goal of this semester is to get a minimum of 3 projects done, at least 1 fully patterned yourself. So the first thing I want to review is reading a pattern. When we take a look at a pattern, it's going to tell us a lot of information. On the front, it's going to have an image of what the piece will be when it's finished. On the back, it'll give us a lot more important information, if I would argue. It's going to tell us what the garment's going to look like when it's not stylized, when it's laying flat. So we have a front view and a back view, or I guess this is 2 front views. And then also will give us the different variations. We could see what the front view is for A, B, and C. And then we can also see the back view, which will be similar for A and B. It's going to tell us what fabric to use for this pattern. So for example, this one tells us to use light to medium weight wovens, such as a linen, and then linen, chambray, tencel, linen, rayon, challis, crepe de chine, silk, which we talked about earlier, chiffon, and voile. So these are just some examples of fabric. So these are mostly to the light, but some go to the medium weight range of fabric. And it'll tell us what kind of notions we may need in addition to the pattern, in addition to the fabric itself. So for this pattern, it has facings that are fused. So we'll need some lightweight fusible interfacing. We'll want to use a thread. It calls out polyester thread. And then this is a tool that's not called out often in pattern making, but they say marking tools, and it's so that your dots line up and everything. In our pattern drafting, we're not going to be using dots. We're going to be using notches, because all dots can really be notches. It's the bottom line. From there, once we know what the pattern's going to look like and which view we want to choose to make, and we know what fabric we want to use and what notions we may need in addition to this, we want to go ahead and take a look at the sizing. I'm not sure, did we talk about finding your size last time, Dion? Yeah? No?
No.
It's hard because it blurs together, because right before this class, I have the fashion sewing class. So I wanted to, I couldn't quite remember. Okay, perfect. So many patterns have 3 measurements that are given: the bust, the waist, the hip. Some other patterns, like if it's a pant pattern, will also say inseam, which is the measurement from the inside of your groin, like from your inside of your leg all the way to your ankle. The most common measurements being bust, waist, and hip can be taken across these horizontal points on your body. You'll get the most accurate measurement if you have someone else measure you, especially for your bust, waist measurements. You'll want to make sure that you're not holding your breath, you're not sucking it in. You take a deep breath, you let it out, and you reach neutral when you take your measurement, so that you can see where your body rests. That rest measurement is where you want to be. I have a very bulky sweater on today, so this would not be an accurate measurement for myself, but I'll go ahead and demonstrate if I were to take this measurement myself to find out what my size is. So I have my measuring tape. My first measurement's my bust. My bust is right at my apex, the largest point in my body. You can think when you go get sized for your bra, they always take this measurement. So I'm going to lay my tape right over my bust, take a nice breath in, relax to neutral, and then take that measurement and use that as my guide measurement. So this is putting me at 36 inches. I'm then going to move down to my waist. My waist is about the same line as my belly button. Some people it's a little higher, some people it's a little lower. It's the narrowest part of your torso. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and take my measuring tape. I'm not cinching it in. I'm not keeping it super loose. I'm not sucking in my abdomen as I take it. I'm taking a nice breath in and out, get to neutral, not cinching it into my body, taking my measurement of my waist right at 29. Great. And then finally, your hip measurement is at the widest part of your body. I have a very, very small butt, so I apologize, but it's right here where it's the widest part of your body. So the largest part of your butt you're going to include. You're going to take your measuring tape. You don't breathe through your hips, so you don't have to worry about breathing to neutral. Go ahead and got an extra cat now. We keep the back door open and sometimes my neighbor's cat comes in. And go ahead and take that measurement. Again, don't pinch in, don't keep it too loose, just have it resting against your body. I'm wearing jeans right now. I wouldn't use this measurement. I would use the measurement of my body naked. I recommend when taking measurements, in my experience, you are the tallest and thinnest when you first wake up. You are the shortest and widest when you go to bed. I like to say afternoon or evening. If you can be down to your underwear, that's the best time to take your measurements so that your clothing is going to fit most comfortably. Unless you're planning on wearing padding or waist training, you know, or cinching pieces in. And if you're going to do that, take your measurements while wearing said pads or said corset. Okay. Was that clear? Great. Let's go back to my little measurement, my little slideshow, and I will email this slideshow out after class today, just like last time. So taking my measurements and having my measurements in my underwear close to the end of the day, the afternoon, I'm going to go ahead and circle the sizes that I measure. My bust is, well, I'm wearing a very bulky sweater. Say my measurement is my bust being 34, my waist 28, my hip at 38.5. I will want to, if this is the first time making a pattern or cutting and sewing from a pattern, I will want to use the largest measurement and cut that size for all of the pattern pieces. If I have sewn a pattern before, I can take some beginning pattern drafting lessons and blend the sizes, but so that I have a pattern that's going to fit my body closer than if I were to just choose the largest size. But I will go ahead and cut fabric based on the largest size. So once I have my sizes, I'm going to go ahead and find out how much fabric I need. So each view has a different quantity of fabric because clearly some are longer, some are more cinched than others. It calls for different pieces. It's going to have the width of the fabric. Standard widths of woven fabrics are 36, 45, 55, 58, 60-ish. Those are about the ranges you'll see. Most patterns will call out 45 as the narrowest. So if you are using, say, a hand woven cloth, a lot of times hand woven cloths can be just 36 inches wide. You'll need to get more yardage. And then we'll choose, depending on the fabric we choose, we then go over and find what our largest piece is, and we measure down to use that side. So if I had a 45, if I was doing view A and I had a 45-inch fabric, I would go ahead and have 2 3/4 yard cut. I'm using a 58-inch fabric. Even if it's a 55, I can usually get away with a 2-yard cut, especially if looking at the pattern at larger sizes. Larger sizes are still 2 yards. Even further up, of course, it gets a little bit more, but 2 yards will be fine. Again, if it was view B, I would come over largest size, figure out what my yardage would be, or view C, what my yardage would be. Great. So we only have 20 minutes left, and I'm going to do this very, very fast. So I apologize. So please ask tons of questions. If you have questions after class, feel free to email me. Give me 24 to 48 hours to respond typically. I'm in the process of trying to buy a house, so I might be a little bit distracted. I apologize. So hopefully I get a house, but if I don't, it's fine. I love my little apartment. Okay. So when we look at our patterns, it will usually give us an idea as far as where our bust measurement is, where our hip measurement is, where our waist measurement is. This is a caftan, so it doesn't have a lot of shape. It calls out here, usually our bust mark is going to be right underneath our armhole. So this is the bottom of our armhole here. We can go right across here and say that this is our bust line. It will usually also have a dart at, it will always have a dart at the hip. Sometimes it will also have a dart at the waist. So for this pattern, for instance, it has the dart at the waist, and then otherwise the pattern, if it doesn't have a dart at the waist, it will have a marking in the middle of the pattern saying waist line here, so that you know where the waist is going to fall. I am 3 different sizes of my 3 different measurements. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the bust, waist, and hip of each of my pattern pieces if the bust, waist, hip is in each of those pattern pieces. And I'm going to blend from the bust of my, whatever size this is, my 6 to my 8 to my 10. So from my points that I know that they are my measurement points. So I know that right under my arm is my bust. Right at my armhole is my bust measurement. So I'm going to use that smaller measurement because I have the smaller breast. And then I'm going to go ahead and blend it out to a larger waist. So I've got my purple line is my curve line, blending it out to my larger waist. And then I have a larger hip. So from my waist to my hip, I'll blend it out further. And I'm finding a line that is similar to the lines next to it. So these are pretty straight lines. So from my waist to my hip, it's a straight line. This should be also pretty straight. So I'm going to go ahead and use this as a straight line, looking at this line here. After my hip, I'm going to go ahead and cut whatever that largest measurement is, my size 10. After my bust, I'm going to cut my smallest measurement because my bust is the smaller size, and which is the size 6. I would cut up and around the size 6. When I get to, for this pattern piece in particular, we don't have any choice in sizes here. So then I will just continue with the outermost line. This is a caftan. This isn't necessarily super clear. If we take a look at a blouse pattern like the Kylie, these are all patterns, by the way, that you can purchase at our studio in Alameda. We have our Kylie pattern. We're going to go ahead and try to identify, if we're still going to be going in between sizes, we want to identify where is the bust measurement, where the hip waist measurement, and where the hip measurement is. This pattern is a very loose fitting top. So I might, if I wanted to be a little bit less blousy, go ahead and cut the whole thing with my bust measurement. Or if I wanted to be oversized, go ahead and cut the whole thing with my hip measurement. As the person making this garment, you're gaining the knowledge to look at the garment, look at the fit as it's modeled, and decide how you want it to fit. Do you want it to be super loose? Do you want it to cinch in a little bit? If you want it to fit in a little bit, you can make that adjustment in the pattern. My bust point, again, is under my armhole. My waist, I believe for this one, is marked. My waist is this line that says lengthen or shorten. It's hard at first to identify these points, but I want you to try when you find your patterns. And then of course, this notch here is going to be my hip notch. We take a look at the Celio. We have our bust right at the underarm. We have our waist right at our waist notch. And you can tell it's our waist, which is our narrowest part, because it kind of comes in a little bit, right? Because we cinch in a little bit at the waist compared to our bust and our hips. And then we can call this our hip point right on the outside here. So we can blend it in or out as we want. Whatever we do to one piece, we're gonna have to do to the other piece so that it can sew together. So if I choose size 6, size 8, size 10 for this blouse, I need to go ahead and do the same thing to the back piece. So this is the back piece with, it has a very fun yoke, like so. So this, wait. This is the pocket. That's the skirt. Oh, I didn't have the whole thing on here because of size. So if there's a front and a back, you need to have the front piece adjusted. You have to do the same to the back piece. Taking a look at a pant, same concept. We can take a look at the drawing. We see that the pant rises, it hits right at the natural waistline. We know that this top line here is our natural waistline. And then we come to our hip point where we have a notch. So if we need to blend from our waist to our hip, we blend from our waist to our hip and then down. If we do something more complicated that has a full body, absolutely can do. Whatever size we're choosing for the bust, we're going to want to continue that into the sleeve because the bust is going to end right at the underarm. This is only part of the pattern, I believe. Yeah, this is just the sleeve and facing pieces. Whatever we do to the waist, we need to do the waist of the pant. And then if we do something to the hip, we need to do it to the front hip, back hip, and then the pocket that's going to sew into the hip so that it all lines up. And I have my example. Okay. So here is an example of a pant. And we're going to change the size and blend it to create the proper size for our garment. Say, oh, because it's a screenshot, it doesn't zoom in nicely. So if we are going to say, blend our, let's for simplicity's sake, say we're going to blend a 0 waist to a 4 hip. So we're going to start our blend at the waist, right at this waistline. And we're going to come to our size 4 hip notch. If we take a look at this, this is more of this line. These lines are a little bit more curved. So what we can do is use our hip curve to kind of find a curve to blend this out. Part of this is intuition. Part of this is just kind of looking at bodies and looking how people are shaped, identifying parts on a pattern, and then blending those parts to create a more custom fit. Some people have hips that are much more boxy where they shoot out pretty close to the waist. So maybe like a square hip, you might want to blend it more like this. If you have a more gentle slope, maybe you will blend your line like this. If you're not quite sure yet, because we've just begun, no big deal. Just try to mimic this line to be a similar curve that the line that's already presently there. You're going to need to have more curve if we're going 4 sizes up in between these 2 measurements though. And then we have our hip point here. We would then just continue to cut along this 4 line all the way up into our rise, where then we would come up to our 0 waist and over. If we do that to one pant leg, we have to do it to the other, which I have my other pant leg here. Same thing. We're going to take our waist point at our 4 or 0 and blend it to our 4. and we can adjust the curve. If we're not quite sure how this curve is going to sew to this curve, if we're happy with one of them, we can cut it out and lay it on top of the other one, matching up this point to this point so that this curve is exactly the same. Giving you lots of cheats, and maybe it's too advanced, these cheats, but I know that you're capable to at least absorb it and then maybe apply it for your second garment before we do a fully custom pattern. What if, so that's a pant, and then we'd cut it out just the same using the hip measurement to cut until we get to the rise where we blend it up into our waist. This piece has an inset pocket. This is our inset pocket. We would also want to make sure that our pocket pieces blend and sit nicely. So if we are blending from a 0 waist to a 4, we can then go ahead and blend this out if we want, but it looks like our hip notch is right down here, so we might not have to adjust that at all. Let's get another more complicated one. I thought I had my file open. There we go. Great. So for instance, the leotard, if we are going to blend this to this, and we want to do different sizes, say we want to go from the innermost to the middle to the outermost. We can adjust that on one and then transfer that adjustment to the other. If this doesn't line up quite right, this is a knit fabric for this one, so you have a little bit more give. What we can do is cut this whole piece out. So let me go ahead and trace our new lines. So then we will follow this around. We're going to follow the largest size. And then once we come up to our center front, since we have the smallest size, we're going to go ahead and start following the smallest size at our bust. Don't worry, I will straighten it up in just a second. It's just how Illustrator works. I'm just tracing what this pattern would be, blending it from our smallest to largest size. So you see I'm finding that smallest curve line. And now that I'm down here, I'm going to use the largest curve line. And then I've got it blended. Oh, armhole. Ah, don't twist on me. Had a touchpad for 2 years. You'd think I'd be better at it by now. And then blending this like so. So I have now my smallest size from the top blended to my largest size at the bottom. because my measurements equaled on the pattern to be, oh, why won't you just go back to neutral? I don't know. My measurements, oh, it's just not being nice. My measurements ended up being these measurements for say. So then if I'm not confident with this line and this line, what I can do is go ahead and cut out my front piece and lay it on my second piece to find this side seam curve. So that if I'm not happy with the one I have, I can get there. And then follow the back the same way. So if I were to do that, I could start with these two, because this is the reflection of that. Oh wait, since it's a copy, I could just do this. Smallest size on top. This is what we do in fashion design. We play on Illustrator all day and we draw clothing in vectors. So I have the smallest size on top, close enough. My line's not quite perfect. It's okay. I want it to be close, but if it's not quite perfect, we do want it to be close to this. This is being a knit, it's harder because you want this line, wherever the seam line, to match the length of the seam line here. We have more space in the front of our body than the back of our body and the waist because of just, that's where our organs are. And so sometimes our backs are a little bit narrower. There we go. So then we have our adjusted front and our adjusted back piece. And it essentially is our small to our large from our bust to our hip. Okay. Are there any last questions? I know that was kind of fast and kind of crazy, and maybe it's just the introduction to it. We'll keep coming back to it because we're going to do multiple projects this semester. But those are things to think about. Take a look at your pattern, see if you want to adjust it that way. If you don't, take your measurement, find your measurement, cut your measurement out, whatever the widest measurement is. And then we will do our first piece that way, maybe adjust just the length because maybe it's too long. And then we can start talking about our side seams, our front seams, back seams for bringing in a pattern piece to contour it more towards our shape. All right, great. Are there any questions before we sign off tonight?
No questions.
Well, thank you both so much. I will send out these slides tonight and take care.
Thank
Thanks, you too. Good luck.
Oh,
Bye.
thanks.
See you next week.
Yes.